Hello, and welcome to a new camera angle at Office of Harbour. This is very temporary because I'm currently kneeling on the floor and this is a bad plan. But I'm going to do a thing I do at the end of every year, whereas I stack every book that I've read and I see how high it can get. This is something I've been doing for a few years now, and in 2022 I read more books than I ever had in any year of the rest of my life, so this is going to be a really big stack, and it's probably a bad idea, but we'll see how that goes. And conveniently, when I've got everything stacked up, I can find out what I would regard as the best books of the year that I've read, what are the worst books of the year that I've read, and also reflect a bit on what have I gained from reading all of these books in this year. My suspicion at the beginning of this video, having not stacked everything up yet, is not that much. Like, I really want to clickbait this video and be like, what did I gain from reading all these books? And the answer is just nothing, right? And we'll see how that goes when I get to the end of it. I've set up my camera on the other side for a fun time lapse. Fun for you guys, not fun for me. This is going to take me a while, but I will see you when everything is all stacked up. Okay, that's about all I'm gonna do. I had the thought of putting it all together, but then look at this, right? It's so unstable that a slight breeze will knock it over. So I know at some point in this video, it's all gonna come tumbling down and I'm going to regret every choice that I've made. So let's just leave it like this, all right? This is 3 piles comprising of what I think is 85 books. We're probably missing a few here and there, but everything in here I have made a video about sometime in 2022, which is surprising to me. That's so many books. Wow, that is a lot of books. I think what I'll do is for each of the 7 categories that I've been trying to read this year, I will pick one favorite out of all of them. I'll do a top 5 overall, and then I will talk about bad books. That means I will need to undo this pile, which I'm already starting to regret. You know what I think I might do actually? What if I tried to make them together? This is a bad idea. I'm gonna do it. Okay, so what if I literally just... Oh, okay. I already feel the mistake here. Okay. It's not gonna stand. If I take this hand off, it's gonna fall over. But it is up to my torso, which means that if I somehow got the bottom one up here, it would be taller than me, which is impressive. I think I needed a helper. Maybe if someone was here to help hold it for me, then we could get it all together. But that's enough shenanigans for now. Whoa, look at that wobble. All right, and what I have here now are my favorite books of 2022. There was a lot of precarious moving around in that stack, which I'm glad no one had to see. But yeah, there we go. I've got one from every category and a few extra bonus ones just to round out the things of the year. I think that this is quite indicative of my tastes. I feel like all of these books have a kind of connecting thread, whether it's their pacing or their thematic content or just their writing style. But let's go through those. So I'll go through each of the categories one by one. Wow, what have I done? I'm cheating, first of all, because my old classic and my big book is going to be both The Grapes of Wrath. This is quite a long book. This spans generations going across on a huge journey from Oklahoma to the West Coast in the United States. And it's a very long narrative that's spaced out with these descriptions of nature and the environment which don't really have anything to do with the characters except for a bit of symbolic significance. So it does feel long. It feels like this huge adventure from one place to the next. And it's loaded with this thematic commentary about human nature and about economics, about how we relate to each other, especially in times of economic downturn, how ties like family and romance and parentalhood can be strained by societal forces that are just much bigger than our control. I think it's one of the books that made me reflect the most on my personal relationship with work and how that relates to my understanding of family and relationships and friends, and how the work that I do makes me treat the people around me just that little bit differently. I think this book has just so much to say about that, and it's still so relevant today, even though this was written in the 1930s relating to the Great Depression in America. Thematically, it just hits so close to what it means to be a worker and to be trying to make ends meet, right, in a society that doesn't always care for you. So this got 5 out of 5, and I really, really enjoyed it. If you have to read a book from before the 1950s, I strongly recommend this one, but it is hard going, right? It is pretty long. It does have lots of moments where you don't really know the momentum of it, and the ending is odd. The ending raises a lot of questions. But aside from that, right, I hugely, hugely enjoyed that one. The writing is plain and poetic at the same time. It's very evocative, and I'm so, so glad that I got around to reading this. This was originally one of those books where I thought, oh, it's too big, I'm never going to read that. And thanks to this challenge this year, I almost just slapped all the books aside from them. Yes, I found this, loved this, really, really great. So that is going to be my favorite for Old Classic and Big Book. For Modern Classic, it's Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. Oh, it's got to be Housekeeping. This, I adore it so much. I felt so many emotions through the entire time. I thought that the way the writing and the description and the imagery and the symbolism captures the intricacies of family life was just so, so incredible. I felt so strongly for the entirety of reading this, and it's just one of those books where you're stunned, right? You don't know how the author managed to pull it off. You read a sentence and you feel something, and it's not even knowing that they use a technique well. It's genuinely going, why do I feel this way? Why have these words done that to me? And I so rarely get that feeling, but it's incredible every time I do. Housekeeping is an easy 5 out of 5. That's my favorite of the modern classics. Going to the Australian books, this one's going to be The Yield by Tara June Lynch. This one came out only a few years ago. It's a really interesting narrative that splices up 3 different styles of storytelling. One is in the modern day about a young Aboriginal woman going back to her family region after leaving to study in the United Kingdom for a while. It's spliced with her discovery of her grandfather's narrative, where he was trying to write a dictionary of rhetoric words that he was afraid of being lost. But each of the definitions of those words are connected to the grandfather's personal experience of them, right? So instead of defining it based on what corresponding English word it would be, it also gives an anecdote on how that word specifically, not just the meaning, but actually the concepts, was relevant to the grandfather's life. And that is tied in with a historical fictional journal of a white missionary who is conflicted by how he can best serve the Aboriginal people of Australia when he recognizes the cruelty and just the callous treatment that the Australian government at the time were imposing on Aboriginal Australian communities. So this is so detailed and so rich, and the way that these plots intersect is fantastic. But I think the thing that really stood out for me was just that dictionary. The way that words themselves had sentimental and historical and familial meaning for these characters, where the language, both metaphorically and literally, is a connection to our past and our heritage, and rediscovering that and relearning that is such a powerful act of reclamation, of really knowing where you come from, but also the kinds of joys and sorrows that comprise yourself, right? The fact that the language itself is a marker of who you are and the people and the forces that have made you. I thought that was just so powerful and so interesting. The way that all of that was tied together was just really, really fantastic work. This is definitely a 5 out of 5 as well. My favorite Australian book that I've read this year. So let's go to, where are we going to? Let's go to the Globetrotter books now. This one was difficult because I didn't want to insinuate that I was kind of like ranking different cultural styles of storytelling against each other. It's really weird to say that one of these was the best, but the one that I enjoyed the most was from quite earlier this year. This was I Sweep the Sun Off Rooftops, which is a collection of short stories by the Lebanese writer Anan Al-Shaikh. These were really great ways of connecting ideas of culture and tradition with really personal feelings of longing and desire and identity. I thought the themes came across really closely here, and there was such a good diversity of stories here too. So many different types of protagonists, so many different kinds of emotions being represented, that you got this very rich portrait of life in this area but also the kinds of different cultural attitudes that people would have towards love and connection and devotion and loyalty, all of these really big themes with just this such a unique take on it as well. So this was a great find. I can't believe that I picked it up on a whim from a bookstore and happened to be such a great discovery. So that is I Sweep the Sun of Rooftops. Okay, genre fiction is going to be The Buried Giant. This, I gave 4 out of 5 to initially, and it was the first genre book that I read this year. And I have thought about this book basically at least once a week since January. It has had such real estate in my mind because the questions it asks about memory, but also how we treat each other, is just so salient. And the fact that the book ends on... Is it a spoiler if I say this? The book has a lot of ambiguity in it, but the ambiguity is part of the appeal because it reveals that we never really know, right? We don't truly know exactly how memory works. I'm going to start this all over again because I'm spoiling everything right now. Oh, this is so difficult. I didn't hear the bit where I talk about heaping in my mind, but I really don't want to go into spoilers. I cut the previous section because I was just spoiling everything. I really, really want to talk about the ending of this book. Oh my goodness, I really, really want to talk about that. But I think the surprise is necessary. If you know me in real life, I have this bad habit of looking up the plot of movies because, I don't know, I like knowing just how the stories will go, and I don't know if I'll ever go and see it. And also, I used to have this theory where spoilers don't really matter to me because I care more about execution, right? So if I know how a story is going to end, the execution of the text is what creates the emotion. So even if I know what's going to happen, I might still enjoy the book or the film. And if it's just based on the surprise, then sometimes I feel it's a bit cheap and it's not really worthwhile. This is the exception to that, right? This one, I think, like, you really, really need to be surprised by the ending. So I can't say anything, but I love it. It's so good, but I can't say anything. It's difficult. This is The Buried Giant. It's the best genre book I've read this year. It's so good. I keep thinking about it. I lament that I gave it a 4 out of 5 because it has haunted me so much. I genuinely think I will be pondering over the question it asks in the ending for years and years and years. It's good. Go read it. Okay, and last one. I had to do one for my light reads, and I think this is a difficult one because I never intended for any of the books in the light reading category to be good, right? I wanted them to be quick and easy and a nice palate cleanser from some of the bigger, more higher-minded books that I read this year. And you can see from the stack already, that's the stuff that I like, right? I like books that have detailed themes and ask really difficult questions and require me to think about them and mull them over for a little bit. I like books that have subtle emotions rather than powerful or sensationalized ones. And that's the reason why many of the books that I read for light reading I just didn't enjoy, because I thought they were exaggerated or hyperbolic, or they didn't really have anything that added to my life, right? They might have been fun for a day or two, but I wish I had something that lasted a bit more than that. And the one that comes closest to being something that I will continue to think about is Song of Achilles. This one is so popular, and I think that I was quite critical about it when I reviewed it, maybe to be edgy, because I know that everyone loves this book on the internet. It's pretty good, and the way that it's written is quite enjoyable. I like the way that it plays with the reader's understanding of the Greek myths, that most likely readers are going to know the broad strokes of the events and know the key characters in the Iliad, but they might not have read the original Iliad, right? So they're not going to know the absolute specifics. And into that, Madeline Miller weaves this interstitial story by telling the narrative of the Iliad from the angle of a different character. It's very lightly postmodern. It has those ideas of questioning existing narratives and also looking at themes that are relevant for the modern day, but using historical contexts. And I think it's done quite well. Out of all the books that I've read for light reading, this one is the most skillful. I think it has the most stuff going on under the surface, and I do know that it's making tons of people cry all around the world, and that is worth something as well, right? I think any book that can create that kind of strong emotion, but also have an underlying nugget of thought and examination and themes, I think that works quite well. So I will put that on this pile. I quite liked it. So there's two more things going on this pile. One is, I don't really know where to put this, but The English Patient is a good book. Go read that. And the last one is the most difficult book I've read this year. I'm surprised because I didn't think this was going to be as hard as it was, but it's Midnight's Children. This was so difficult. This took me so long to get through because of its structure, because of the way that it categorizes the protagonist as both a metaphor and a real human being, and also the way that it spans not just his life, but the circumstances leading up to his birth. The first 130 pages are giving the background for his birth, and then going through his entire life, making his narrative both an interesting story, but also an ongoing metaphor for Indian independence. It required so much knowledge about culture and history, but it was rewarding because it kind of revealed to me how much I'd gained from reading itself, that I was able to use knowledge from previous works of Indian literature to then make more sense of this one. I think going into this book blind and not knowing anything about it would be the hardest out of all the books that I've read this year, which you now can't see because of this stack didn't plan this very well. Other books are quite hard, right? Crime and Punishment was quite hard, Foucault's Pendulum was quite hard, but those books were kind of hard on their own terms. If you had dedication and understanding, you could get through it. This one, you needed to have more knowledge from history and culture and other literary works, right? And so I think this was probably one of the most demanding books that I've read this year. It took me by far the longest to get through, and I think I still understand the least of this one compared to any other ones. So that's going to be the most difficult book of 2022. Alright, and that's my pile. If I had to rank them based on how much I enjoyed them, I will probably put some numbers on the screen. Actually, no, let's just do it quickly. I'm going to go, number 5 will be Grapes of Wrath. Number 4 will be The Yield. Number 3 will be English Patient. Number 2, Housekeeping. Number 1, Buried Giant, absolutely Buried Giant. Can't believe it. First book, one of the first books I read this year, Buried Giant, stayed with me all year. Every single book I've read this year, I was like, yeah, it's good, but it didn't make me think as hard as Buried Giant. Read The Buried Giant. Oh my goodness. Read The Buried Giant. And on a more negative note, let's talk about some bad books. These are not even that bad. They're just books that I think are fun to make fun of. First one is going to be Water for Elephants. This one, I think, was written as part of NaNoWriMo, like the thing where you try to write a novel in November. Writing a novel in a single month is really hard and will probably result in something that is not great. I know this because I've tried it multiple years, and every time I look back at the stuff I try to do that month, it's bad, right? Bad times. And this novel is about kind of like the P.T. Barnum era of traveling circuses. It's a romance, it's also a melodrama, it's got a lot of things going on at once. It's also got this weird frame narrative about an older gentleman who is reminiscing about the good old days. It has one of the tropes that I hate the most, which is a nice guy protagonist that doesn't really have anything else going for him besides being a nice guy, rescuing a woman who doesn't really have anything else going for her except for being really beautiful from a abusive relationship. And this book plays it absolutely straight. I find this to be a really damaging narrative because it's just not something that is grounded in reality. I think that just the thought of treating a hero as a person who rescues women from abusive relationships and abusers being people who just exist and never change, and yeah, it's just uncomfortable. It doesn't make me very happy to read a narrative like that, and this one does nothing to question it. It just goes, yeah, this character is great and he's a good dude and women need saving. Yeah, bad story. I thought it was very funny too that it does that whole, you know that movie cliche where it's like, I bet you're wondering how we got into this mess. Let's jump back 30 years of time to figure out how we got here. This book does that exactly straight as well. It starts with the climax of the novel. It doesn't really explain what's going on, and then it jumps way, way back. And one of the funniest things to me was that the climax of the novel happens effectively twice because of this. It happens in the opening pages, and it happens again towards the end of the novel. I thought the entire seriousness of the climax was taken away by the fact that I've read it already. But I had to double check because I thought, did the author literally just copy paste the original climax and put it later in the text as well and just give it to us twice? And as it turns out, no, but it's really similar. Like the paragraphs, the beats are really similar, and my suspicion is that they just changed a few phrases here and there so it would get past turn it in, right? Ugh, it's so strange. It's so weird. I know people love this book, and I know that it does produce some strong emotions because it's light reading, right? It's like a simple story. Some people really love that trope of rescuing a woman from a domestic relationship. I don't sympathize. So that goes on my do not like pile. Next one is Short History of Tractors in Ukrainian. I still don't really know what this book is, and maybe that's why I don't like it so much, is that I was very misled by all of the stuff on the cover that says it's extremely funny, and having gone through half the book going, this isn't funny, and it's also kind of sad, and it feels mean to laugh at any of these characters. None of them are sympathetic. All the characters here have their flaws, and a lot of it is rooted in migration from Ukraine to the UK. A lot of those idiosyncrasies come out in the way these characters are described, but it seems like the way they are presented to the audience is not designed to garner sympathy. Instead, it's just designed to be people to be laughed at, and that made me feel quite uncomfortable. So that is going on my do not like pile. Ooh, book 3 on my do not like pile. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? People love this book. People love A Little Life. And people hate this book. People also hate A Little Life. What do I think about A Little Life? It's big. It's bigger than it needed to be. The first half, I was thinking, I don't think it needed to be this long. There are lots of little vignettes and anecdotes and descriptions that I thought, you could have cut this. It doesn't feel like it justifies the enormous length of the book. And it made the first couple of sections hard to get through because I was like, what's this leading towards, right? What's the relevance of all of these things? And then you get halfway through the book and it just starts slapping you repeatedly, just trying to hurt you as much as it can. And how do I phrase that, right? I don't know that much about why everybody reads books, and I don't know if the intention is to read a book that gives you the strongest emotional effect for what it attempts to do, right? Like, it did make me feel strong emotions, but surely literature is for more than just doing that. Surely literature is for more than making the reader feel sad or shocked or helpless. I mean, I definitely did feel those things, but is that all there is? Does that justify the amount of trauma that's in here? I don't know. And that kind of dissatisfaction tinged with apprehension, because just with my experience of mental health, this book felt very damaging for me to read. I had a few weeks where I was really thinking in negative patterns of thought because a lot of my anxieties were validated by the characters, right? I worry about how this book might be received by someone who has had more of a struggle with mental health, but I guess I can't really speak too much about that. I don't know. I think it's also the fact that this book is so famous and well regarded, and I didn't buy into all of that. Yeah, I would put it a little bit less than mediocre. My life is somewhat worse having read this, so that goes in my bad pile. Next on my bad pile is Brideshead Revisited. I feel like I should revisit this book because I am amazed at how little I remember from it. I remember the characters a little bit, I remember their escapades, I remember the fact that they get arrested early in the novel for like rowdy behavior or whatever, and they just get bailed out. And from there, I just thought, oh, this is a book about rich characters who don't get consequences. And I think maybe I was too harsh on it because I read the entire time thinking I was not going to like it. There were moments where I did think, hey, the description here is interesting, right? These characters are quite well done. But at the end of the day, I also don't really know what it's trying to communicate. And I think I'm just so far removed from the world it's trying to describe. Like, my family's never owned a manor, right? I can't get into what this book was trying to do. Maybe I should read more about it. Maybe I should actually try to figure out why it's so well regarded. Because it's a classic, right? It's well known enough to be on lots of favorite book of the year or favorite books lists. So I wonder why. I wonder why, and I wonder if it'll keep having its longevity, or if like I said earlier this year, it will drop off, in a few more decades. And last one, Birdsong, did not like this. It's such a mess. This book is, it's so all over the place. It's a war novel, and for what it's worth, the war segments are really good. The descriptions of just being there on the battlefield and the kind of risk that you take every single day, and also the role of the soldiers themselves, the fact that they were not gung-ho people fighting the front lines, but really sappers, right? They were trying to figure out how to navigate the trenches and keep everything safe for the rest of the soldiers. I thought that was a great perspective. Just the everything else about this book, the flashback to before the war, when we have this protagonist who again does that trope that I hate, rescue the woman from abusive relationship. Protagonist is nothing but just general nice boy. That's was silly to me. And then the flash forward into the future narrative, rediscovering the past. I think, just like with Brideshead Revisited, if I had more of a personal connection to World War One, maybe if I had family who fought in the war, or if there were, I don't know, elements of my life or my neighborhood or anything like that that was affected by the war, maybe I'd be more interested in the history itself. But this one, it gave me some interesting moments, and then it took it away to just go with a lot of lowest common denominator stories about marital infidelity, and I'm just going, why? It could have been so much more focused, right? It could have been so much more interesting, and it just didn't do it for me. Okay, so books I didn't like, that's done. I'm sorry if I said mean things about the books that you like. Okay, what is the last thing I'm doing here? I don't know. So, that's my books of 2022. I've read 85 books last year. I got through way more than I thought I was going to, and I think the best thing that I could have done was have that structure of trying to read a book from each different category. It meant that I was always looking forward to something. Because if I was reading a book that I wasn't enjoying, I would think, well, later in the month I can pick out something from another country or something from another kind of author or another historical period that would help drive my interest. I would think, oh, I just need to get through this book and work on the next thing, right? And it introduced me to a lot of authors and a lot of works that I would have never heard of otherwise. I enjoyed it quite a lot. But the big question of, was it worthwhile to read all these books? I still think it's no. I still think if I had watched movies or if I had played video games, I would have enjoyed my time about the same amount. Like, I've just talked about the books that were quite memorable to me, and now looking at this pile, there are very many books that are not that memorable to me, that will just kind of fizzle out in the next couple of years. I think that certainly a lot of the books that were quite popular, that are very well known, were books that I read to be part of the conversation, to be aware of them, and maybe that's why I didn't enjoy them quite as much. I don't know. I'm gonna keep this up. In 2023, I'm going to try and read a few more specific categories, rather than going for something as general as like a modern award winner. I'm gonna look at books with certain themes, or that I'm interested in for certain reasons. I also will have more choice over what I read, because I think I've gone through a number of big old cornerstone classics that I can read more niche things. Hopefully that can result in more interesting content. But if you're a person thinking, oh, I need to get through so many books, right? There's so many important books that I need to get through to be well read or to be intelligent or wise or whatever, don't feel that way, because I don't think many of the books that we consider to be classics are that significant. I think that maybe they were just very popular in their day. And sure, they have a few interesting things to say, but it's not as if you have to go through hundreds and thousands of books to be considered knowledgeable or to be considered wise or to be considered worldly. You can develop yourself in any way that you want. Books are a valid way, but they're not the best way. They're not the most efficient way. You will encounter a lot of garbage when you read. And even if you're like me, you're trying to seek out things that interest you, you will still be disappointed quite often. I think that this is something that you truly enjoy, and regardless of whether you're reading something great or something bad, maybe it's worthwhile to count your numbers, but ultimately don't worry too much about how many books you read in a year. I think that 85 is too many, honestly. It's too many. I think it's probably better to be more judicious about what you read and don't finish things that aren't interesting to you, and just pick out a few things which will give you that incredible feeling, right? Like being completely unbiased, but if your taste in books is exactly the same as mine, you could just read the ones that I like over the course of a single year, and you would get about as much as I got out of reading all of these, right? So that's my thoughts. Is reading worth it? If you want, but for most people I would genuinely say no. Okay, so I'm just gonna re-record this last segment because editing this video and looking back on some of the stuff that I said about whether I think reading is worthwhile, I would like to make a more eloquent point than what I said, because I felt like what I said ultimately was very dismissive. And looking even at some of the books that I put away, the exercise of putting them away was really interesting, because there are so many books that I read and loved this year that I didn't even get to talk about in my overall wrap-up. So there is a lot of joy to be had in reading, and there are a lot of books that I loved reading this year. And I am a fan of reading, which is why I make this channel, right? I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't enjoy it. I think the reason why I'm so dismissive is because of this narrative that's so pervasive. I think, especially because I was an English teacher for a while, there's that belief or attitude that reading is magic and reading will change your life, and that everyone's lives would be better if they just read more, and you're an insufficient human being if you don't read this many books per year. I think that is rubbish, right? I think the belief that people's lives are less valuable or less complete because they don't read enough, that's silly. But there is joy to be had in reading as long as you are picking out the things that you personally enjoy and you're being true to your own interests. I just don't like the idea that people are being guided to works of literature, especially classic works of literature, that have very little to do with themselves, and being forced to read them and forced to like them or pretend that they like them for some kind of cultural value, right? That to me is really silly. And I think that is what reading is for a lot of people, because of our exposure to it in the schooling system, is that you're given these classic books and you're told these are the ones that are worth reading. These are the ones that will make you a better person if you read them. And if you're a student and you read one of those books and you think, I didn't feel anything like what the teacher said I would feel like, you can feel dissatisfied and you can feel almost like a failure because you didn't understand the book the correct way. And that's something that I really want to resist when I make this channel. I want to talk about classic books in a way that shows that they are not necessarily that special, that they're just some words on a page that people liked 200 years ago. Classic books might be incredibly meaningful to you if you care about their values or their historical context, but don't force yourself to read them, and don't feel like you need to read a certain amount of books per year to be worthwhile. Don't force your way through anything that you don't enjoy. I fall into this pattern as well because I read or I watch a lot of YouTubers do their book content, and a lot of them will do 100 books a year, 200 books a year. That's incredible, right? But that's nowhere near what I'm capable of doing. I'm going to try my darndest to do 100 next year, and I've lined up the shortest books I own over there in the slight chance that I could do it. But I'm not trying to fool myself into thinking that reading that many books is going to improve me as a person or anything high-minded like that, right? It's just another silly task that I'm going to do to make my life a little bit more interesting. And I think maybe that's a more healthy attitude to have towards reading, is whatever style of book you like, whatever topic you think is enjoyable, go for that, and don't worry about anything that doesn't interest you. Next year, this year really, my topics are going to be things that interest myself. I'm going to be reading books about bodies of water. I'm going to read 12 books about various bodies of water. Novels, of course, but that's something that I find quite interesting because I love the way that imagery is used to describe rivers and oceans and lakes. That's just unique to me, right? And if that's something that's interesting to you, then please watch. And if it's not, then don't listen to my silly recommendations. That's hopefully what I can impart by making these videos, is that reading can be enjoyable, reading can also be a load of garbage. And depending on how your outlook is, make sure that you spend your time on the things that are valuable and don't feel pressured into doing anything you don't want to. That's me signing off in a very solemn and serious Arvo Suhavo. Okay, goodbye.